Hello, and welcome back to Authentically Shawna. I'm your host, Dr. Shawna Burke. Today, I am joined by Yvonne Prowse, who is a spiritual director. She has her master's degree in both spirituality and spiritual direction. How I know her is from being the director of Loretto Maryholme Spirituality Center, and she also teaches others how to be a spiritual director. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, I'm delighted to be here with you, Shauna.
So let's start out talking about what is spirituality, because I think there's so many interesting definitions that I'm sure you hear all the time. And so I'd love to hear what your definition of spirituality is and how that relates to and is different from religion and faith.
So, thinking about this, I figured I would not get the same definition of spirituality from any two people.
Absolutely.
And so I actually went to Wikipedia and found that they were pretty good. And it's changed over the centuries what spirituality, in general, what people might say about spirituality. And they have said that modern spirituality centers on the deepest values and meanings by which people live. And I thought that kind of goes with what I do when I open a retreat, for example, and welcome everyone, regardless of what their religion or non religion is. Living by whatever it is that is drives the deepest meaning in our life, I think, has a spirituality to it. And for some people, there's religion attached to that, or some faith practice. And for some people, there isn't. So, it used to be spirituality was aligned with religion, right? You kind of thought of them the same way. I think most of my lifetime that has not been the case in general, in North America anyway. The other language I use is the inner journey, the inner path, the inner being.
Mhm.
So, even for a lot of um, modern theists who believe in God, there's a recognition that you encounter God in the inner journey as well as outside of you, right?
Let's talk about what is spiritual direction then, because I don't think most people even know that concept.
So, in the school of spiritual direction that I'm in, which is a pretty common one in North America and Europe, it's all about the relationship with that which holds that deepest meaning for you. So, if one believes in God, it would be the relationship with God. But it doesn't have to be that. God is such a it's been become a confusing word in some ways because it means so many different things to different people and can trigger different things poorly in people. But that's just an example. So it's about the relationship with that which you hold as holding the deepest meaning. So that might be someone's higher power. It might be a sense of one's deepest self. And that isn't what that is not so significant to me as the spiritual director as the relationship with it. So in spiritual direction, we're attending to what's happening on that level and how one wants to respond to it. For so I haven't met anybody who can't have a spiritual direction conversation. Um, and I get people with faiths or not any kind of faith. I get a lot of people who have been quite burned in the faith tradition of their family. And still, it's valuable to them to have this conversation about inner journey, about what really is going on in the deeper sense of self and who I am in the world, who I am to myself. It's a conversation I don't have very often. I mean, yeah, it's very few people have close enough friends that they can really talk with them. So they find it very refreshing. I do too. Meeting with my spiritual director, very refreshing to be able to talk at that level, and as I said, to pay attention to What's going on there? What's moving? What's not moving? What do I want to be happening that's not happening? Whatever. Yeah.
And so, on the converse side, what is a spiritual director? When you're the spiritual director, what role do you play in someone's life?
So I'm listening with what I'll call the directee, the person who comes for spiritual direction. I'm listening with them to what's happening in their life. There's no part of life that doesn't connect to this. If we think about that deeper journey, well, health issues come into play, family issues come into play, work issues come into play. How I enjoy spending my life in my free time comes into play. It all has a place. And it's all affected by in that spiritual journey. It's all part of it. So people share about whatever is most on their mind, which could be a happy thing or a struggle or a painful thing. It could be a desire, a dream. It could be a sort of discerning, deciding a direction they want to go, a choice they have to make. Um, I'm listening with them for what the wisdom is coming from that deeper place. Hopefully, I'm asking questions that elicit more noticing on their part, more awareness, more remembering things that they might have forgot since it happened 2 weeks ago or whatever. Yeah, so we're listening for what that the kind of what the movement is there and how they want to then carry on.
And when you're holding space for someone, are you then giving some sort of guidance? Are you asking them to tune into their own guidance? Is it a combination?
It's a combination. Yeah. A spiritual director should not be giving advice. And we're trained in how to listen to what might not even be said, but might be between the words, or we notice in their movement, a gesture, facial expression. And I also strongly come from the belief that we all hold deep wisdom. And ultimately, we all know within ourselves what we need. We might need suggestions about specifics on that, but I don't hold any great wisdom about what you should do or what's going to help you that is I mean, I have ideas, but your inner being connected with whatever fine being there is in your worldview, it's where the wisdom really is. That's what the conversation wants to elicit. Questions I'll sometimes ask people, they'll tell me that I have this feeling or this idea or something. And I'll often ask, okay, you feel that in your body. And more information comes from noticing that. We don't pay a lot of attention to what's going on in our physical being when we're thinking on this level, but it's a lot is written there.
Let's talk about education for spiritual direction. What does that look like? I know you have a master's degree in spiritual direction. What is that process like to become a spiritual director?
So it varies for a lot of people. You do not have to have a master's. And in fact, there is no standard. I've never heard of a standard anywhere in the world for spiritual direction, though, for spiritual directors. But I know there is not in North America. If you want to become a psychotherapist or a marriage and family counselor, there's certain things you have to study. You get licensed for it. There is no kind of licensing body for spiritual direction. I find it very important that we understand something about the stages or the various movements of spiritual growth and development that typically happen in people. I think there's ways of understanding human development that are important for us as well. We better have really good listening skills. And I think there's an innate part of that with people, but then in the training and education, you build those. The program I went through and the program that I ran for over a decade, we really emphasized the listening skills. Because if you don't know how to listen to the person, the conversation is not going to flow. If you're practicing spiritual direction in a particular religion or faith tradition, you really need to know the scriptures of that tradition. And at the same time, I know how to really listen to those movements in a person's inner being, then I don't have to know their scriptures super well. It helps if I do. But if I'm saying, hey, I'm a practicing Christian spiritual director, people are going to expect me to know the scriptures, and it's very helpful. And yeah, again, if you're working within a religious tradition, then yeah, you need to know the tradition because it's a part of people's experience. So the more you can know about the part that I found probably most practical in some of my training was the learning to listen for how things move and shift in people and how change occurs, because that's what all of us are after. We want to open further to the fullness of life, want to be free interiorly of the things that consume us in an unhealthy way. We get moved one way or another toward the good or away from it, or toward the things that aren't so healthy for us or away. And it was learning to listen to the movement and notice that and help people be aware of which movements they want. That all of the training was important, but that was a really essential part. And it keeps us from putting our own agenda on the other person.
You had said that a lot of us go through a very similar spiritual journey in life. Do you mind sharing more about what that looks like or key takeaways as to where maybe some of us are in our spiritual paths?
I'm trying to figure out how to put that in a nutshell, Shauna.
I asked
I
a very deep question. I know that
well,
this is a thesis statement, I know.
yeah, right. Yeah, you could write a whole book on this, right? I find the spirituality of young children really incredibly open, and open in the sense of wonder and awe, and that means so much to them. Their minds are open to possibility, to things that don't necessarily have to be proved scientifically. And if we grow up with the sense of a God who is after us, a divine being out there that answers requests, there is at some point a great disappointment when that doesn't always happen. And so there's a period of disillusionment if that has occurred in people's early years. There's a need to find out from an adult view what it means that there might be a being that actually responds, but isn't Santa Claus, right? It doesn't, or isn't a vending machine. I put in my prayer and I get out the request. Yeah, so some of the journey has to do with people's images or concepts of what a divine being might be. But other parts of the journey have to do with just how we mature and come to know ourselves and believe in ourselves, love ourselves, and allow love in from other beings, whether those are natural or supernatural. And we can grow in interior freedom. So the things that might cause our compulsions or addictions as we grow and come to know ourselves better and what our place is in the family of things. We grow in interior freedom from those things that hold us back. And then we become more and more able to live for others. And so some views of the spiritual journey is the being able to give one's life in the service of others. I don't mean they have to die for that, but I mean, and we have examples of that, like in Martin Luther King. But just that more and more, it's less and less self centered and becomes more grounded clearly in oneself and one's spirituality so that one is so self centered.
Let's talk about benefits of seeing a spiritual director. So you're listening to this conversation, you're wondering, hey, what why would I go see a spiritual director? Tell us some of the benefits or one of the things that you appreciate about being spiritually directed. And if someone's interested in working with a spiritual director, how do you go about finding one?
Let's talk about the benefits in spiritual direction. I'm going to use some of myself as an example, and it's really an example that's imperfect because not everybody has the same faith tradition I have. I my belief in the divine is really important, and though I hold a tremendous respect for people not having that view, and it's not an easy relationship. Let me tell you. And I watch people struggle with that, especially when they're going through hard times. It is really helpful to have somebody else who can affirm what you've held as your belief, but is being shaken. And even if that belief is just in the general goodness that exists, and then something awful happens and you no longer know whether you can trust that that goodness exists. Um, Talking it through in spiritual direction, you can get to what do you really believe and what do you want to do about the struggle. Um, when tragedy happens, we can feel so horribly alone and sometimes really betrayed. And if the belief is in a higher being that we thought would take care of it, we can feel betrayed by God, we don't want to sit alone in that. And the spiritual director receives it without judgment. Um, there's such compassion and empathy in a spiritual director to understand where you're coming from. No judgment, but what do you want to do with that? Maybe a valid question. Sometimes when we're in a joyful time, we want someone to share it with as well. And I was mentioning earlier something about spiritual direction helping us discern a direction, make a decision. When we're at a crossroads, it can be really helpful to have someone else's view to it, which therapy can help. But in spiritual direction, we're trying to listen for that deep wisdom um, um, in that inner relationship. Again, relationship with God, a relationship with one's higher power, a relationship with one's deepest self. Um, and I've had a lot of people who've come to spiritual direction because they know they're at a crossroads and they have no idea which way to go, how to decide it. And they feel like there's something more than just a head decision or just following the heart. They want a more complete picture of the process. And that is something we do a lot in spiritual direction. I've also had people who've come in because they've had an encounter with something they cannot explain. And they need to talk about it, and they're afraid if they tell anybody they don't, they're gonna make it sound like they're crazy. And again, no judgment, we listen and we discern together. What what moves them in the direction of what is holy and good, and what moves in the other direction, and how do you stay in the direction you wanna stay in? So I mean, there's no bad reasons really for coming to spiritual direction except, oh, I'm just curious about what it is. Well, okay, I won't get too far with that. But people can come and say, I've heard about it. It sounds like it could be good. But usually there's something more than just idle curiosity. People aren't going to waste their time that way. Um, a lot of times people also feel like something has changed. Maybe because of an outward circumstance. Maybe it's just a change in their time of life that they used to hold a certain belief. Now that's not serving them and they want some help with that. So we work with that as well. I think you asked how to find a spiritual director.
Yes. If someone wanted to work with a spiritual director, what are ways to connect with spiritual directors?
So I was going to say in North America, but this is globally. Spiritual Directors International is an organization that keeps a directory. Then a spiritual director who signs into that directory. You can go online and look at the director, and you can look at the map and find a director in the area you want. It will also tell you whether they'll meet with people virtual or not, and tells whether they have special skills in certain areas or special experience in certain areas, like working with grief or certain peoples that they particularly are comfortable working with or they find are comfortable working with them, like the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, reasonably, people want to know, are they going to accept me? Right. And so there's a lot of different things that can be checked off under a spiritual director in that directory. So it tells you a little bit about them. Again, there's no governing body, there's no licensing body for it. So whoever signs on and says, I'm a spiritual director and signs on that directory is going to be there. There's no screening process, so to speak. But it is a great listing. It's not going to show every spiritual director that exists. It's just those who sign on to it. But it's a good starting place. If um, a person, if you're somebody who belongs to some kind of religious tradition or a church or a faith community, you can ask around there. Some people might know. Certainly, pastors and a lot of the Jewish and Christian churches would know of someone if there's someone in the region. I think that's becoming more and more true in the Muslim community as well. Um, and again, you don't have to be a person in a certain religious tradition. I directed someone recently on a retreat who is following much more of an indigenous kind of practice. And that's fine. And I have some experience with that, which also helps. It just helps me know the language and, helps me understand the kind of questions to ask. Those are the best. The other option, the very good option is to contact a retreat house, which could be a Buddhist spirituality center or a Christian one, whatever. But they should know of people as well.
So, speaking of retreats, I wanted to ask what you see the difference in seeing a spiritual director, we'll call it in real time versus retreat time, because I feel that those are different settings and circumstances. So, when I came this summer and did a 6-day silent retreat, I got to meet with Mary, who is my spiritual director, on retreat for 4 days in a row, which is a very different experience from meeting with someone weekly, monthly, every few months. That's a very different experience.
I'm really glad you asked. And in fact, in the training program I ran, we would talk about that difference. Um, there's there's a difference in content of what you might talk about as the person on retreat. Uh, in your retreat, we'll talk about what's going on generally in life, why you came away on a retreat, why do you want this time of inner journey without the outer confusion or disturbances. So we listen, well, we listen both in ongoing direction is what I call it when I meet with somebody like monthly and on retreat. We listen to what it is you desire. That's huge. What you desire is going to guide everything. Um, but then on retreat, the second day, we're also going to talk about what happened in the first day. And the third day, same thing. And we'll again, we'll notice together what happened, what that mean for you, what did it do for you? And so what might be sensible going forward in the next day? And then we repeat that day, the fourth day. I've done 40-day retreats with people where we do that every day. You get a break every week or so. And you can sometimes notice some patterns even developing in the retreat. I mean, for people who have a sense of relationship with the divine, they start to notice how the divine is with them. Okay. So maybe you're somebody who believes that God is love. Okay, so God is loving with me. But people start to notice specifically what that looks like, what it feels like for them. And you start to know what you can expect or trust or rely on. Those things happen over monthly meetings, but in the retreat, we're able to kind of watch just more closely day to day. In the monthly work, one of the things I also watch, this was a teaching I received in my training, and I pass it on to those I train, is we do listen for the different aspects of life. Because I'm meeting with you every month, almost every month of the year. If I never hear how your work life is, I'd wonder, gee, where does that fit in terms of your spirituality? Is it just on the side? Do you bring it into your spirituality somehow? Not that you're going to go talking about your spirituality at work, but in your spirituality, it's encompassed, right? So I'm paying attention to that. And often people keep the same spiritual director for a number of years. So that person gets to know, they get to know your patterns. They know when something is off. They can see when something is shifting in the relationship, the spiritual relationship. Uh, that can happen if I just meet with you once a year on retreat, but it's not quite the same as when for 5 years you can meet with somebody every month.
Do you see people on retreat and then continue to be their spiritual director? Do you do that work or do you send people after retreat to others for spiritual direction?
It's not uncommon for someone to ask at the end of a retreat to continue meeting, but it's not like it happens all the time. Um, and usually I suggest to people go home, and if you still feel that way in a month, contact me, and we'll set up a time to do that. Sometimes at the end of your retreat, you're like, "Oh, this was so great! I want to keep doing this." And then life, life happens, and we don't always have the same amount of time or energy. But yes, I do that. I love it doing that. Um, and uh, there's no rating system like somebody's better because they're in spiritual direction than somebody who's not. So the person who leaves your retreat and isn't asking to continue, that's fine. There's no expectation that they would ask. Once in a while, I do suggest to people that they find a spiritual director. And usually, the people who come on retreat have traveled from afar. And usually, people want to find somebody they can meet with in person and always have to do it virtually. I do meet both ways, and most of the directors I know since COVID, pretty much everybody will meet with you virtually. But it's nice when it can be in person and when people have that option.
Let's talk about spiritual practices. What do you consider spiritual practices?
Okay, so if spirituality has to do with these deepest values and the meanings that give people that we live by and the kind of inner path, then spiritual practices are anything that help us to deepen that, explore it, be attentive to it. Meditation is often just being attentive to what is and being in the present, which is a very high value in most spiritualities, and certainly in the Christian faith. if we look at the mystical tradition, being able to be present and not have my mind wandering off here and there, that's a valuable spiritual practice. Um, but equally so, jogging could be a great spiritual practice for somebody. Uh, Gardening is what I hear a lot about. Hiking, getting out to a great vista can be very important. Um, Liturgy, so the Mass in the church, in the Catholic Church, gatherings in Protestant churches, in in the temple, and, whatever faith tradition, they all have some kind of gathering. That's what I mean by liturgy. So with the regular practice, it's a wonderful spiritual practice for many people. So it's not so much about what, it's the intention. If it's aiming at that relationship and being attentive to it and deepening it or responding to it, that's your spiritual practice. Journaling is very helpful for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes it's to clear out the stuff that's busying our minds so we can listen within ourselves. Sometimes it's the way of listening is the writing. Art, all sorts of artwork can be a great spiritual practice. I love what happens when people work with clay or they try to draw something, just whatever it is about their spirituality. It gets us out of the head and we're in touch with some of the other stuff that's on inside us. Yeah. Yeah, the list goes on and on.
What does spirituality look like for you on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis? What are the things that are frequent? What are the things that are infrequent? What does that look like for you?
Yeah. So every year I go on an 8-day silent retreat. Oh, and I meet with a spiritual director. I turn off my computer and my cell phone for that time. And that's a time of just really settling down into that spiritual relationship and just giving my time to that. Just like we might go away with our spouse for a period of time. We like to take a vacation with our spouse. So it's a renewal time together and having some fun together. I mean, that's part of what happens on retreat in a different sort of way. Um, on a That's the annual basis. On a daily basis, there's always some kind of reflection. Journaling used to be a big part of my practice. I find lately that words are not as helpful in my practice. It's more of a sitting without words, but in the sitting in a sense of the presence of the holy. What it will look well, some other things that I include, I love getting out in nature. That's a very nature was the first place I had an encounter of the divine when I was quite a wee thing. And it still is one of the most essential go-tos for me. Um, a regular practice and being at the Eucharist at Mass is really important for me. I That's not everyone's thing. I understand that. Yeah. Uh, and what it's meant has changed over the years as well. I used to jog regularly, and that was the time when at first I was clearing out all these thoughts in my mind, and then I'd settle into just here I am moving in my body, like the life, like the life, like the being of love. There's a real sense of kind of coming home to something in myself and greater than myself in jogging. And some of the practices changed depending on what's going on with that relationship. One of the practices that's very important in one of the schools of spiritual direction, the main one that I work with, is a daily review of how I've noticed the holy with me, where I maybe could have noticed it more or ignored it or needed more help. And it's just a daily practice of taking notice of, again, whatever that spirit is. If we're talking about spirituality, I'll just use the word spirit. Again, that might be something totally inside for some people, and I don't want it to sound like I don't understand or don't appreciate that. I do. Um, but it's the taking time, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, to pause and say, okay, I'm aware that there's something deeper here. For a while, I was doing this before COVID, and then during COVID, it was really helpful to do this when we were all in lockdown. I would pull out my pastels every morning and just draw some abstract thing about how I was that morning as I entered this new day. And it always had a centering, deepening practice with me. I kind of felt like, okay, now I'm ready to start the day. I've been in touch. Another thing I was doing during COVID, or when I had to be quarantined because I had traveled from Canada into the US and come back. And so then you have to do 2 weeks of quarantine. But I lived in an area where there was a small, safe place that I could just walk these figure eights out on the road and stay away from the neighbors. And so that was how, because I couldn't go jogging. I couldn't go out into the town to do my jogging. And so I would just do these figure eights, and it became this wonderful meditative time.
Almost like your own personal labyrinth.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah. And I'm so glad you mentioned labyrinths. I wonder how that was for you at Maryholme. We have a great labyrinth at Maryholme. It's the same pattern as the one at Chartres Cathedral, and it's the same size. So we'll walk into it, it's a half mile. So if you do the whole thing, it's a mile's walk. It, it, yeah, the stories I hear from people from the labyrinths are just marvelous. There was one woman who talked about a bird on the land that was just hopping along in front of her, and she'd pause and the bird would stop and it would hop a little further. So she decided to follow this bird, and she didn't know where the labyrinth was, and it led her right to it.
Mm,
She was wanting to find the labyrinth, and this bird led her right to it.
mm.
I don't know what to make of that. I just think it's great. Yeah, and the labyrinths anywhere can be great. It's lovely when it's out in nature and you can encounter some of the other beings as well. So we have foxes on our land, a number of other things, and people encounter them as well. But it's a wonderful practice. I mean, you can walk a labyrinth with all sorts of intentions and different approaches to how you do it. But often people will have a particular thing they're grappling with as they enter the labyrinth. And then you pause when you get to the center and notice what's happened with it. And if there's a burden you want to lay down, you can in your mind, in your heart, you can give it over in the center, or you can actually put a symbol down in the center of the labyrinth as a symbol. I'm letting this thing go. I don't want to carry this weight any longer. And then notice how you feel walking out of the labyrinth. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah, I did it every day when I was there. I so enjoyed my time with the labyrinth.
It's great.
Well, let's talk about, speaking of the labyrinth, let's talk about what is a spiritual retreat, because that's what you all offer.
Mm.
And what delineates a spiritual retreat from another retreat? And how do people find spiritual retreats?
That's a tricky question. The first part of it, I mean, I know how to find them. I'll tell you. But the first part, it's not like there's a fine line. I mean, you can go away on a ski trip, but have the intention of really noticing the beauty of it. And even if you're with people, the beauty in the people. And you can find that it becomes a very spiritual thing. Um, Usually, when we talk about a spiritual retreat, we're talking about something that's intentionally set aside for that inner journey and for attention to it, for maybe some work on it, so to speak, maybe some play with it. That can happen at the Dharma Center. It can happen at a Vipassana center. It can happen at Christian centers. But I guess I would it can happen on a yoga retreat, though there are different types of yoga retreats. Some hold the intention of that deeper work. not all of them. Yoga retreat can be a fantastic thing. In fact, we just had one at Maryholme a couple weeks ago. And, the space is not large there, so we can only have 8 people on the retreat. And we did grief through gentle yoga, using the yoga to help move and release some of our grief. It was just a beautiful weekend, really beautiful. So I would say spiritual retreat it is a time away from the busyness of life and the day-to-day demands, where we can just really focus on that deeper life within us and around us. Uh, and the best way to find it is Google spiritual retreat.
That's how I found you guys.
They're great. And if you know the kind of retreat you want, if you're Jewish and you want to go to a Jewish center, Google that. Catholic like I am and you want a place that has mass every day, well, Google Catholic Retreat Center or Spiritual Center. Yeah. Yeah. So a Google search will turn up a great deal. If what you want is a Buddhist one, Google that. I have a friend who goes regularly to the Dharma Center near here and makes her retreat there a few times a year.
Is there anything else that you'd like to add to our conversation that I haven't asked about around spirituality or around spiritual direction?
I don't want to end on this note, but I do want to mention that there is a code of ethics for spiritual directors. So while we don't have any kind of body or like, there is a code of ethics. Spiritual Directors International, which I mentioned, has published one for a long time. I know in Australia they have their own ones around, but they all have a baseline for what's expected of spiritual directors. And so if people have any concerns, that's worth checking out. It includes things about the care of the people we see. It includes things about keeping our own selves well taken care of so that we're a clean vessel meeting with the person. And that it has a number of things in it. Yeah, so that's just I think useful for people who are concerned to know that there is that code of ethics out there. So so, yeah, I guess the other thing is we can be shy about this because in our culture, this isn't a conversation we have.
No.
Right? How God met me. Oh my God. We don't do that in the grocery store. We don't do that at the bar. I rarely comes up in our schools. Yeah, there aren't a lot of places for that. For our higher power, we can talk about that in 12 steps. Community from there, then those are people you can talk about it with, but it's not dinner table conversation with your extended family, right? So it makes us shy about it. It makes us uncertain about how it will be received by somebody. The gift of having that safe, welcoming place in spiritual direction to talk about it, even if we think we don't have good words for it, we sound like we're saying gibberish. We think we sound that way to ourselves, right? Um, we find that a spiritual director doesn't judge us that way. And in fact, receives it, just welcomes it wonderfully. So, it, it- spiritual directors carry a stance of reverence towards the people we meet with. We do. We have reverence for them and the journey they're on. And for anyone to bask in that for an hour a month is just a great thing. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, great, people might feel shy about it, but it's a very rare thing when you take the leap to find a spiritual director to talk about it so that you don't feel like it got met wonderfully.
Well, if you've been listening to this conversation and want to go on a spiritual retreat, I can't recommend enough going up to, it's near Toronto, going up to Loretto, Maryholme. did an episode, which was episode 1 of the season, about my experience there. And I had an amazing encounter with the divine. I hope everyone gets to do something like that because it's so rare. And I think you're so right about the shy or the uncomfortableness of speaking out loud these things that seem very inner worldly, and finding a way and venue to speak them out loud. So I'll be sure to link Loretto Maryholme in the show notes. You've been listening to Authentically Shawna with Dr. Shawna Burke. The information contained in this podcast is provided for information purposes only. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. Thank you so much, and we will see you next week.